There's soft goth, there's new goth, there's trad goth, there's cyber goth, and there's mall goth. The ever-expanding discourse on Gothic aesthetics is one that we could continue having in the comments, but for today, we're talking about Gothic interior design. I'm Kaz Rowe, and this is A Style is Born, a show where we explore the histories and details behind some of the most iconic design styles. In our last episode, we explored brutalism, one of history's most controversial design styles, and today we're entering the spooky world of Gothic design. Shall we? From the dark whimsy of fantasy tales to the creeping fears that drive historic horror, Gothic style has prevailed for centuries. Born in the medieval years of knights, castles, and grand mythology, it crept up again with the 18th and 19th centuries' renewed interest in all things romantic and ancient. And in 2022, the internet gave us Adam's Core, and in 2023, Whimsy Goth. The mysterious flavor of the Middle Ages really seems to be immortal. But why? It's a little too hot to wear my full suit of armor, and I also don't have a squire to help me get into it, so you're just gonna have to deal with my medieval thirst trapping. Anyway, English architect James Essex once wrote in 1770, "There is no state of architecture so little observed and less understood than that which we call Gothic." And from the Renaissance until the Georgian era, that was very much true. The term Gothic was attributed to this era by Renaissance scholars, calling it Gothic as in barbarous, referencing the literal Goths, as in the Germanic people who helped bring down the Roman Empire. Those Goths. Lasting approximately from the 12th to the 16th century, the original Gothic period is separated into three general groups: High Gothic, Renaissance, and Late Gothic, the latter being the most ornate and iconic. These eras are well known largely for their architecture, grand cathedrals, castles, and fortresses, to name a few. This period of 400 years gave us soaring arches and ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and ornate stone carvings. It gave us massive stained glass windows and elaborate tracery, and yes, it gave us gargoyles. And as far as furniture goes, the pieces essentially emulated this architecture: the verticality, the intricacy, the grandeur, and the religious motifs. Do these chairs not look like mini cathedrals? We would be remiss to talk about this period without coming back to the church. Everything about Gothic design was intended to evoke a sense of spirituality and reverence. These spaces were constructed to be magical and to make any person, regardless of social class, feel that once they stepped inside, they were already in heaven. The church was a key part of medieval village life, as it was often the center of people's lives, both figuratively and literally. It was the community meeting place, the school, the theater, the place of scientific study, and more. And as much bad as the medieval church did, and they did a lot of that, they had some pretty breathtaking interiors. Why, oh why, does history have to be so painfully nuanced? I say we fast forward to the Victorian era. The Victorian image of Gothic style can easily be summed up by this quote from Charles Dickens' 1841 book, The Old Curiosity Shop. "There were suits of mails standing like ghosts in armor here and there, fantastic carvings brought from monkish cloisters, rusty weapons of various kinds, tapestry, and strange furniture that might have been designed in dreams." So, yeah, a little scary, but mostly magical. Gothic Revival interior design happened as something of a reaction. Much like Art Nouveau designs, Gothic Revival furniture was largely a reaction to the unsavory aesthetics of industrialism. The 19th century Romantic movement was underway with its nostalgic longing for a more beautiful time, a more chivalrous time.
True love, you heard him? You could not ask for a more noble cause than that.
And oddly enough, for the Victorians, that time was the medieval era. Death, war, and disease notwithstanding.
Bring out your dead!
But I suppose contradiction is what makes Gothic Gothic. The visual language of Gothic interior design appealed to Victorian religious sensibilities, as they were not only fascinated with the age of chivalrous fantasy and romantic grandeur, they were keen on returning to design that emphasized religiosity, viewing the Christian and Catholic designs of medievalism as a much-needed contrast to the pagan designs of the equally popular neoclassicism. The animosity between the Greek and Gothic revivalists became an all-out battle of the aesthetics during this time, so clearly nothing has changed. Gothic revival designers like Augustus Welby Pugin argued that neoclassicism was absurd and immoral. And so the Victorian era churned out its own Gothic interpretation, harkening back to a more regal era that tickled their fantasies of opulence, ornamentation, and craftsmanship. Later on, Victorian Gothic design began to be associated with horror and death as that generation passed away, and the things that they built became old, decrepit, and abandoned. And boy, do we sure love old, decrepit, and abandoned. At least I do. This and the emergence of a massive horror-filled Gothic literature category gave way to the darker elements of modern Gothic design, with its embrace of the mysterious and the macabre.
Just like the multitude of goth subcultures, modern Gothic is also a spectrum. Today it can be as moody, dramatic, and elegant as you want it to be. Modern Gothic design elements include, most notably, a sultry color palette. Dark and rich purples, greens, reds, and 50 shades of black. But if the Victorians taught us anything, it's that Gothic is a style of many contradictions, so throwing in a random pop of bright, vivid color is totally valid. Gothic furniture embraces dark and stained woods, especially ones that involve ornamental lines and shapes and engravings. Stones, glass, and metal accents pair perfectly with the depth and mystery of these details. And speaking of perfect pairings, the heavier the upholstery, the better. I'm talking the most decadent velvets and brocades you can find. And finally, maximalism. In modern Gothic design, extra is okay. If you're leaning towards the spookier elements of the combined Victorian and medieval eras, or even just the goth music scene of the 80s and 90s, skulls and taxidermy, mirrors and mantelpieces, old paintings, occult and religious symbolism will do. And if you're leaning towards a more minimalistic look, throw in a dark curtain and a candelabra and you're good to go. Despite its occasionally morbid aesthetic aspirations, Gothic style never dies. It's undead and ever-changing. In fact, I've heard the term whimsy goth floating around the internet lately, which combines the moodiness of Gothic palettes with its eclectic maximalism with the lighter, more airy, playful whimsiness of styles like cottagecore. This version of Gothic design was pretty dang popular in the 90s when witchcraft and grunge had a rise in popularity in media and TV shows and movies. Where there's a goth, there's a way.
You can still see surviving examples of Victorian Gothic revival buildings, many of which still keep their interior styles too. Here in Chicago, we have many Gothic churches like Fourth Presbyterian Church in River North, and the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel, which boasts the wonderfully medieval drawing room, bar, and cafe, among many, many other examples, not the least of which, the University of Chicago. Arguably the most famous example. And in New York City, where I'm currently paying a visit, check out the Met Cloisters, a gorgeous castle-like museum filled with treasures of the Middle Ages. Well folks, thanks for sticking around and learning with me about the history of Gothic design. Truthfully, the fact that this style has existed for centuries makes it really hard to not make this video 5 hours long, but I hope this means that you're inspired to go out, learn more, and bring some Gothic flair to your home. Head on over to Wayfair and see what good stuff that you can unearth, and I'll catch you next time on A Style is Born.